Why are Acuras so cheap? Is it because they're from a culture that prioritizes quality? Or they're from the luxury arm of a brand like this Honda Prelude right here that is known for wanting to be one of the longest lasting sports cars on the planet? Or the Honda CR-V like we see right here that's trusted also to run 300,000 or 400,000 miles, and then is often transferred down generation upon generation because family members trust this to give it to a family member. What it is, in fact, that even with the great reputation of durability and reliability that Acura and the smaller brother Honda have garnered in the last few years, things have actually been sliding somewhat. And I'm going to share a list of 5 reasons why you can get yourself amazing used Acura at bargain barrel prices. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
One of the first reasons, in fact, why they're so cheap on the used car market is there's a lot of stiff competition. When we look at vehicles like this, a QX70 here by Infiniti is definitely a voluptuous looking SUV with a lot of curves and sculpted figures. Of course, you get a 3.7, lots of chrome detailing. Or you have brands like Range Rover like this by Land Rover, and it actually is culturally blessed. Now, some may agree that they're not necessarily the most reliable, but if you want a brand name that carries some clout, this definitely, Range Rover is one of those. Or right here, you have a beautiful SUV by Volvo. As you can see, they've really been stepping up their game and styling. Lots of great LED detailing, beautiful alloy wheels fold away, lots of chrome detailing all throughout. Volvo's been stepping up their game with supercharging, turbocharging, and a little bit of hybrid assist. They have great vehicles that look great and perform very well as well. Or you even have brands with the big 3-pointed star. Mercedes is always a brand to contend with. When we look at vehicles like this, they definitely have a reputation for luxury and durability for long term. You do get great details like this, a very stylish looking bold front end, which you don't get as much with the Acuras. You get these beautiful headlights and just a general beefy look to these vehicles. And a Mercedes-Benz is always going to be one of the top pops. If you're out shopping for a new or used luxury vehicle, is always going to be one of those big contenders. BMW also has some great models too, X3, X4, X5, X6, X7. Where do you begin and end? So there's a lot of stiff competition for the likes of Acura, and as a result, because of that competition, prices tend to drive down. And Lexus, being one of their biggest competitors, like this vehicle right see right here is Lexus. This is an all-wheel drive RC350, absolutely gorgeous little sports car. You don't get too many of these vehicles that are as this raw over on the Acura side unless you go all in with the NSX. Of course, this has a naturally aspirated 3.5 liter V6, one of their tried and true staples. Of course, over here we have this beautiful IS series vehicle. Also, you can get with a turbo 4 or that naturally aspirated V6. SUVs like we're looking at right here is the RX 350. This represents their mid-size SUV, and it actually has a lot of space in it. It's on a unibody platform, but you can also get that naturally aspirated 3.5 liter V6 in this unit. And quite honestly, Lexus does a little better job with their naturally aspirated 3.5 liter V6. And while Acura also creates a 3.5 liter V6, it's slightly down on power, and even worse, it still runs a timing belt, whereas Lexus runs a timing chain. And as well, we're talking about the dual fuel injection system in some of the later model 3.5 liter V6 engines in Lexus, where they actually use port and direct fuel injection, so it actually washes the backside of the intake valves and you don't get all that carbonization that you can get with some of the Acura products. Definitely is going to be a win for Lexus in terms of technicality, the way they've designed their drivetrains, and overall long-term durability. Now, the second reason why a lot of these vehicles are flipping hands for lower dollars on the used car market comes down to styling. Now, while we have the latest and greatest MDX here, it's a pretty little unit, but it is a little subdued, if you will, a little bit conservative. And honestly, for people looking for something a little flashier, nowadays, every car has big gaping vents and aggressive looks and tall rims. And then you get these vehicles here, and I know that's not the typical clientele, but unfortunately it is a thing, and the styling is a little bit subdued and a little bit bland. I will give it to Acura though for some details. I mean, they do still give you a real set of exhaust tips on the back that look nice. They're not that plastic junk you find on a lot of vehicles these days. You do get nice high quality rock protection here, beautiful rims, although this person here looked like they already took it along the road too quickly. And of course, you do have some nice touches right here. This is an A spec. And specifically, I like this new style of headlights, and this grille is kind of pretty. But honestly, aside from a few little details, the front end is really the sharpest point of these vehicles. Most of them are very, very generic looking. It doesn't necessarily grab you. But what about some of their other cars? Like this one right here. Also, more conservative styling. Sure, it's a good looking unit on its own right, but this little TLX with the shh it's an all-wheel drive. Look, beautiful little buttons there to open it up, little A, of course, and you do get the real exhaust tips. I will give it to Acura for going old school here. And the styling is a little bit old school. They haven't really spiced things up. And from a design perspective, it's not all that exciting. Another example is the little Acura Integra, as we see right here. The Civic, which is based on its little brother, is actually a nicer, flashier vehicle. The Integra is a little bit dressed down, not a lot of style detail on this vehicle, and as you look around, sure, you do get a little wing on here, and some nice little bottom detailing here down on the rear splitter. And again, you do get those tips, which is nice, but the Integra is actually a relatively minor looking vehicle. The fact remains is this front end looks a little bit dialed down, a little more conservative, and maybe that's the taste they're looking for, being that it's the upscale luxury brand. In itself, looks a lot dressed down. The Honda Civic actually looks more flashy and more exciting, more boy racer, but it's the styling, to me, that hurts their value in some cases. Some people want a little bit more. You got to look at the market, and honestly, I truly believe that they have to think about who they're catering the market to with the Acuras, and it's a more youthful brand. It's not a Range Rover, it's not a Jaguar, which generally curtails to an older clientele, and as such, you'd think they dress it up a little bit. So the styling does hurt. It just doesn't grab people. It doesn't bring people into the brand and say, oh, and lust after it, and say, and have people having dreams day in, day out saying, I need to buy myself one of those. It's just not happening. Next in line is the branding. It's the marketing. It's all of that shtick that kind of brings people to the vehicle. Now, most people I know specifically have bought an Acura because either A, they made some assumptions, they had a Honda before, they wanted to step up their game, and of course they think death by association or affiliation, had a Honda, I want something, I'm going to step it up, let's go a little bit more luxurious, and they go with an Acura. Or word of mouth, friends of a friends who said, hey, I had one once, they were great. And a lot of people end up buying them through word of mouth, but it's not so much the branding, the marketing that's bringing people to the brand. There's not a lot of excitement. There's not a lot of people talking about Acura as a whole. It's just not getting the mark. Have you seen many ads on the TV about that? Do you hear much on the radio? Do you see any big driving experiences coming out? I mean, BMW, we know, for example, is one of the best branding outfits that you can find. Porsche as well, one of the biggest brands. They sell, they go racing, and then they use the racing experience and results as a way to sell their cars. Have you ever heard that term? Win a race on Sunday, sell a car on Monday. That's a term that a lot of people go by, and Porsche is no different. But sadly, Acura, not as much in recent years. And while they have supercars like the NSX has come back, it's also not selling as well as it could. It arguably is one of the best supercars on the planet right now, but nobody's buying them. There's a few sitting in the showroom here right now that I can prove that, but the fact remains is it's just not drawing the people into the market and into the brand. Have you ever heard the phrase precision crafted performance? Well, that's Acura's emblem, but I haven't really heard that much. You don't hear it anywhere else. And sadly enough, Acura is struggling with the very idea that people just don't know the brand that well. It's a great brand generally. You know, they make some great vehicles, SUVs and cars. They have a lot going for them, but they're just not aware. People are not, buyers are not aware that there's such a great vehicle sitting on these lots and lots of opportunities to get into one of these. Sales have been slumping down pretty aggressively. There's just way too much competition that brands themselves better, shows off what they have to show off, steps up their game with performance, technology, and all of those great things that make the car flashier, more fun, quicker. And Acura is sticking with kind of the old school. And sadly enough, that's not enough to sell to the vast majority. Yes, you're always going to have your core base, but you're not going to sell to the masses, unfortunately, and that's why used cars are cheap for Acura. Now we're on to the next one, and we'll talk about reliability issues here next, shortly after this one, but I want to talk about another topic. What's going on with the overall design and the concept of a lot of the vehicles? What we're looking at here is, in fact, an Acura RDX. Yes, okay, it features a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, makes about 272 horsepower. Yes, it's a good looking vehicle. You have these nice headlamps and beautiful gunmetal gray wheels, A-spec version here with LEDs on there, and of course you do get some sunroof on top. It's definitely a good looking unit from back here. It's a stylish looking rig, and most customers end up commenting how these are fun to drive. They're very spirited. The handling is very much sharper than many of their competitors. And the same thing goes for their bigger brother, the MDX. And the MDX, the current generation, which this is not, has a couple of drivetrain options. You can get a 10-speed automatic transmission in either. You get either the base 3.5 liter V6 engine, which is good. Everybody likes old school, but there are some people that want something more innovative, right? And you can also step it up to a 3 liter twin turbo V6 that makes about 355 horsepower. So there's a couple of drivetrain options in the MDX. Now here's the previous outgoing MDX. Of course, they also have those great headlights. As you can see, Acura, lots of branding there. And of course, this one's a hybrid. So this one's actually a little bit of a rare beast, because that's the point. That's where I was actually going with this. You don't see a lot of hybrid vehicles, and they generally don't even make electric vehicles at all. Now, a lot of people don't want that. A lot of people just want simple and easy. Some people want that base 3.5 liter V6 because that's their tried and true, their pudding. That's literally what brought them to the table for reliability. Yeah, 270, 280 horsepower. Now again, as I already mentioned, it's direct injected, so it doesn't necessarily not carbon up, so you can have issues there. It's not the most powerful, but it works, it's reliable. And of course, transmissions. Also, Honda has a little bit of some weak spots in some of the transmissions, but generally, a lot of people like the simple drivetrains. But that's the problem, it's simple. And while you saw hybrid back there, there aren't many hybrids in the brand. You don't see a lot of innovation in general. And so that's the next topic, is lacking in innovation. And when people are out there shopping, you've got to remember, today's shopper is different than the shopper from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, simple, manual gearbox, you know, a simple naturally aspirated V6 or 4-cylinder engine that was reliable and sturdy. Now people want that hybrid. People are raising their expectations for fuel economy, performance. Once you drive, you know, a 450 horsepower Tesla and then you get it behind the wheel of a 200 horsepower Toyota, it leaves a little bit to be desired. Now, with that said, Acuras have continued try and true drivetrains, and for a lot of people, they love that, and that is one aspect. But the innovation, or lack thereof, is one of the downfalls for Acura. And people just honestly get bored when they look at vehicles like this, the new Acura Integra, or the ILX, or some of those other outgoing Acuras that actually utilize the base pinnings of the Honda Civic. Honda Civic is a great car, but why would you basically rebadge, put a new front grille, and call it a day? And that's what's happening, and a lot of people are just bored of that. Again, hybrids, sure, they use it in the new NSX. We saw it in that MDX, but it's not necessarily a pushed product. You don't see a lot of them, hard to come by, and you definitely don't see pure EVs in this marketplace. And as a result of that, it's this lacking of innovation. Still using timing belts in the engines. 10-speed auto, that's fairly mainstream, but they're not doing anything outside of the comfort zone. And that, for that reason, they're playing it safe. It's conservative. And because it's conservative, people are bored. And that's why people are starting to look at some of these other options. Even Toyota, for example. Yes, they use a CVT, but they use that first gear that actually launches you. It's a launch gear, so you don't wear out your belt. It's a much more durable system than something the Jatco, for example, with Nissan. Toyota has learned that using some different technology as well as hybrid is well distributed across the Toyota line, but that is not such the case with Acura. And it's this lacking of innovation. Of course, they just don't have all the technology that you're finding. And while that technology isn't always good, there are a lot of people that are raising their expectations and assumptions to see that type of technology. And if they don't see it, oh, I don't want that. So that's the bottom line. Lacking innovation is also what's hurting the brand. And the next issue is the overall reliability and quality of construction of some of these vehicles. Now, it is a Honda. You're going to expect a very, very good fit and finish with a lot of the vehicles, but let's just give you some examples of some of the key areas that I've been caught up with and I've heard about. I mean, what do we have here? An MDX. Obviously, it's a good looking vehicle. What's the suspension look like there versus what does it look like here? I mean, clearly we have a suspension related issue, leveling problem. This clearly is a problem, but it doesn't just begin and end with suspension issues. Over here, we have ourselves a beautiful Acura TLX. And they talk about issues specifically with panel gaps. You look at that panel gap right there as the hood meets that front upper clip, versus over here, and you'll notice it's actually bigger space over there than it is over here. And then other cars, like we have the Integra right here. This one, sorry to beat on it so bad, I just think the Honda Civic is a better value, a better bang for buck. But with the 1.5 liter turbo 4-cylinder engine, you've probably heard it, it's all over the internet. Honda's had a lot of problems with it, and as well Acura. Anybody carrying that 1.5 liter turbo 4 has had issues where the fuel gets past the rings, winds up in the crankcase of the engine, and essentially diluting the oil And so anytime you're mixing solvents like gasoline with your oil, you're breaking down the oil's quality and ability to lubricate the engine, and you could wind up with early engine deterioration or catastrophic failure. That's a bad scene. So generally what people are doing now is they're advised to actually reduce the time between oil changes so that they're actually able to keep the engine together in one piece. And on top of that, they're advised also to drive it more easily. As you're driving a cold vehicle, when you first set off and you start the car and head off, very gingerly, easily, slowly. That way, it's less likely to push that pressure past the piston rings and more likely that the engine will properly warm up and give it ability to actually survive. Another issue I've heard is some people talking about specifically lane keep assist, where the vehicle doesn't necessarily stay between the lanes and it's actually kind of comes up to a line and then it kicks over and the next one kicks over and it's not all that stable. That's just a few comments I've heard, but I've also heard from somebody who said the vents emit some exhaust smoke. Now that could be a broken flange or just a faulty connection right from the get-go, but I've heard of comments about people getting exhaust fumes inside the cabin, particularly when you're operating the vents to blow that air in from the outside. It's not a great scene. So there's a few quality issues there with the latest and greatest Integras we're seeing right here. But realistically, it's the MDX that has bigger issues. So some of the most common issues on the Acura MDX, like we're looking at right here, is check engine lights or D4 lights, specifically to identify that you might have TCM or transmission control module failures. That is not an uncommon issue. There's also a lot of people talking about, with the wheels and the suspension creating vibration between 35-40 miles an hour, and it starts to get the shake and then it resonates out after you go a little faster. There's also talk about the transmission itself, which takes the power from the engine to the wheels and drives them, and that transmission has been known to fail. And I've even had viewers comment that they bought their car and 5,000 miles later and they had a transmission fail. That's not an uncommon issue, and specifically we're talking torque converter. That's a part that viscously couples everything together and allows that transition of power from the transmission to the rear differential. Now, that is going to be an issue in some cases. Transmission failures, not uncommon, and that is what a lot of customers have complained with some of these MDX vehicles. Yes, you can sometimes find used Acuras for a cheap, affordable, and reasonable price. The big thing you have to ask yourself is why. I give you most of the reasons. You also have to make sure you do a great pre-purchase inspection, make sure there's no accident history as well, do yourself a Carfax car proof, and get the vehicle looked over. If all of those items are good, then there's no real reason that you shouldn't buy an Acura. As a matter of fact, I look at it like a blessing in disguise. I look at it like, why are they cheap? It doesn't matter. They're cheap and I'm gonna take advantage of one. And with all of that said, you wanna check out that? Why in fact are used Infinitis so cheap? You definitely wanna have a look at that video. You're gonna love that too. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.